What happens when a revolutionary superfighter becomes the most hated aircraft in America, yet turns into a secret Soviet war legend? Before you answer, picture this: a factory floor in Buffalo, March 1942. Metal screams, rivets fly, and then silence. A mechanic freezes, wrench hanging in midair, as a furious test pilot storms off shouting, "I'm not flying that death trap." That was the fifth pilot that week refusing to touch the Bell P-39 Airacobra. Brand new, shiny, cutting edge, and American pilots despised it so much they'd rather risk court-martial than fly it. So what was wrong with this so-called revolutionary fighter? Everything and nothing. It had a 37mm cannon in the nose, tricycle landing gear, and a sleek mid-engine design engineers swore would change aviation forever. But in reality, it vibrated like a washing machine loaded with bricks. Its engine sat behind the pilot waiting to cook him alive. And once you climbed past 12,000 feet, it gasped like a smoker on a staircase. Pilots called it the flying coffin. British test units canceled their orders. French pilots never got theirs before collapsing to the Germans. Even Bell's own test pilots started refusing to fly it. And yet, America kept building them. Why? Because in wartime, politics beats logic. Shutting down the line would mean admitting failure and losing months. So P-39s piled up in storage, gleaming, useless, expensive reminders that even superpowers panic-build duds. But here's where the story explodes, because the Soviet Union saw gold where America saw garbage. Before we continue, if you're fascinated by untold innovations that changed history, hit subscribe and drop a like on this video for more amazing World War II stories every day. Stalin didn't care about high-altitude performance. He didn't need dogfights at 25,000 feet. The Eastern Front was mud, blood, trees, tanks, and aircraft screaming barely above the treetops. And down low, the P-39 was a monster. Soviet pilots didn't complain about engine placement. They loved the stability. They didn't fear the 37mm cannon. They worshipped it. A single hit could snap a J-88 in half. Soviet aces racked up kill counts that American commanders swore the aircraft was incapable of achieving. One pilot reported, "It climbs like a stone, but it dives like a thunderbolt." The cannon? Magnificent. So here's the question that ignites arguments every time. Was the P-39 a catastrophic American failure, or did the West simply misunderstand a masterpiece the Soviets weaponized to perfection? Drop your take in the comments. Was this plain garbage, or did America throw away one of the greatest low-altitude killers of World War II? Let's see who you're siding with, the angry U.S. test pilots who refused to fly it, or the Soviet aces who turned it into a legend. And if you think the Soviets simply made the best of a bad machine, think again. Because what came next turned the Airacobra into a legend feared by the Luftwaffe. Soviet pilots had a rule for this aircraft: it rewards aggression and punishes hesitation. No timid flying, no cautious circling. If you hesitated, you died. That brutal philosophy became the core of Soviet P-39 doctrine. Strike first, strike fast, and vanish before the enemy could even blink. They turned a plane Western pilots called a death trap into a low-altitude assassin. The Airacobra swooped in like a steel hammer. Nose down, screaming dive, a single 37mm round tearing a German bomber in half, then a vertical climb back to safety before any Messerschmitt pilot could even curse. And the man who weaponized this doctrine, who rewrote fighter combat on the Eastern Front, was a young pilot named Alexander Ivanovich Pokrishkin, a name whispered with awe in Soviet archives. Born poor, flying outdated wooden machines at the start of the war, he was thrown against elite German pilots with aircraft that should have been scrap. But once he strapped into the P-39, everything changed. He saw potential where everyone else saw failure. He built an entire tactical system around the Airacobra, the formula for air combat, emphasizing altitude control, violent diving attacks, and surgical precision. His pilots didn't dogfight, they hunted. First patrol at 15,000 feet, spot German formations below, dive like a falling anvil, fire at point-blank range, rip the enemy apart, climb back out before the Germans even reacted. It worked. His kill count shot up 5, 10, 20. By the time Kursk erupted in 1943, he was the undisputed Soviet ace, flying an American plane Americans didn't want. German pilots heard his radio call sign and panicked. Achtung, Pokrishkin in the air. The Battle of Kursk was supposed to be Hitler's crushing blow. Instead, German Stukas and fighters were shredded by low-flying Airacobras, diving like predators, vanishing like ghosts. In the first week, Pokrishkin's regiment claimed over 100 kills. His personal score soared again, 23 confirmed kills that month alone. They didn't fear enemy fighters. They didn't fear anti-aircraft guns. What every pilot feared was their own wings, ripping off mid-flight. In 1943, the Air Force faced a problem so deadly it was classified. The wings were failing. Entire bombers tore apart in the sky, killing dozens at a time, not from enemy fire, but from their own aircraft coming apart under stress. Reports came in from every squadron. Pilots swore they heard wings creak and scream at high altitude. Tail gunners watched metal bend and ripple during sharp turns. Command ignored them. Engineers on the ground blamed pilots for improper aerial maneuvering, and headquarters blamed the chaos of war. Nobody listened until it was almost too late. One mission over the North Atlantic turned the suspicion into horror. 30 B-17s cut through a frozen sky, fighting brutal headwinds. In bomber number 27, the pilot heard a metallic shriek, like steel screaming inside the wing. Then came the cracking. The left wing fractured, ripping in half. The aircraft broke apart, and the crew was thrown into the sky. They never even saw an enemy. Their plane simply destroyed itself in midair. The official report blamed turbulence. Privately, the investigation revealed a chilling truth. The B-17's wing design had a hidden structural weakness. It was never built to survive the stress of real combat flying. But instead of grounding the fleet for repairs, High Command took another path. They buried the truth. Thousands of lives were now at risk. Every mission became a game of survival against physics. But everything changed because of one man, not a general, not a commander, not a decorated ace, a field engineer, a quiet, stubborn mechanic named Elias Carter. Carter wasn't special on paper. He had no rank worth mentioning, no inventions to his name. But what he did have was a mind that refused to accept death as part of acceptable loss. After watching 3 bombers fall apart during routine takeoff in a single week, he began collecting torn metal from crash sites. He studied the fractures, traced stress lines with chalk, and compared the damage from 10 different aircraft. The pattern he found terrified him. The wings weren't failing because of damage. They were failing because of design flaws. He submitted a report to command. They threw it out. He warned the chief air engineer. They shut him down. They had a war to fight. They didn't have time for theories. But Carter knew he was right, so he broke the rules and did something that could have sent him to prison. He began fixing bombers in secret. With no official funding, no support, and no approval, he raided the junk piles behind the hangars. He scavenged landing gear cables, spare bolts, cracked aluminum braces, everything he could find. What he built looked insane. Field crews laughed at him. He didn't care. His idea was simple but genius: disperse wing stress before it becomes deadly. Using improvised steel braces and redistributed tension cables, he created a crude but effective reinforcement system. It redirected flight strain through multiple points, preventing catastrophic failure. The problem? If his design failed at altitude, it would rip the entire wing clean off and kill the crew instantly. He needed a test pilot, someone desperate or crazy. He found one. At dawn, a modified B-17 was rolled onto the runway. No markings, no paperwork. Carter had installed his secret reinforcement overnight. Ground crew watched in disbelief. If this experiment failed, the plane would disintegrate in front of them. The engines roared to life. The bomber lifted into the frozen morning sky. 2,000 feet, 5,000, 10,000. The test pilot threw the aircraft into a hard banking turn, the exact maneuver that had destroyed so many bombers. The wings groaned under pressure, and the metal flexed. Then something incredible happened. The strain stabilized. Carter's design held. For a moment, everyone on the ground believed they were witnessing a miracle of instinctive engineering. And then, just as hope appeared, fire erupted from the left engine. The bomber spiraled out of control, and Carter could only watch, helpless, as his illegal invention and everyone on board vanished into the clouds. What happened next would ignite a war inside the Air Force itself, a war not fought with bullets and bombs, but with pride, politics, and power. Because what Carter built didn't just save one plane, it had the power to save an entire air fleet, and that made him very dangerous. October 14th, 1943. 25,000 feet above Germany, Staff Sergeant Michael Romano crouches in the cramped tail section of his B-17, hands gripping twin 50-caliber machine guns that weigh more than he does. Through the small plexiglass window, he watches a Focke-Wulf 190 positioning for an attack run. 6 o'clock low, the bomber's most vulnerable angle. Romano squints through his ring and bead sight. The primitive aiming system, essentially 2 metal posts he must align with his target, offers no compensation for speed, no calculation for deflection, no help whatsoever, as both aircraft hurtle through the sky at combined closing speeds exceeding 500 miles per hour. He fires. Tracers arc harmlessly behind the diving fighter. The FW-190's cannons flash. 20mm shells tear through aluminum like tissue paper. This scene repeats itself 291 times today across the 2nd Schweinfurt raid. The 8th Air Force dispatches 291 B-17 Flying Fortresses deep into Germany without fighter escort. By nightfall, 60 bombers, more than 20% of the attacking force, will be shot down. Another 138 return so badly damaged they'll never fly again. 600 American airmen are dead. The mathematics are brutal and unsustainable. At this rate, no bomber crew will statistically survive their required 25 missions. Post-mission analysis reveals the grim truth. Tail gunners, supposedly the bomber's last line of defense against the preferred German attack angle, achieve hit rates below 8%. Fighter pilots need merely attack from the rear, endure a few seconds of inaccurate return fire, and methodically destroy America's billion-dollar strategic bombing campaign, one fortress at a time. Senior commanders gather at 8th Air Force headquarters in High Wycombe, England. The defensive armament supposed to make the B-17 a flying fortress has failed catastrophically.
Without a solution, daylight precision bombing, the entire strategic doctrine faces cancellation. What these commanders don't know is that at that very moment, on a cold, hard stand at Bassingbourn Airfield, a 22-year-old tail gunner with barely a high school education is sketching a design in his logbook that violates multiple Army Air Forces regulations, a design that will be called mechanically impossible by weapons engineers, a design that will triple tailgun accuracy and save thousands of American lives. This is the story of the innovation they tried to ban, and the gunner who refused to stop.
To understand why Romano's innovation proved so revolutionary, you must first understand the impossible problem tail gunners faced in 1943. The B-17 Flying Fortress entered combat with a defensive philosophy borrowed from naval warfare, bristling with enough machine guns to create overlapping fields of fire. The bombers were theoretically protected through sheer volume of lead. Army Air Force's promotional materials called it a flying battleship. Reality proved brutally different. Staff Sergeant Michael Romano reported to Bassingbourn Airfield, England, in August 1943 as a replacement tail gunner for the 91st Bomb Group. He was a former factory worker from Pittsburgh, no college degree, no engineering background, barely 19 years old when he enlisted. The Army trained him for 6 weeks how to clear jams, estimate range, and pray his shots connected. His assigned position, the tail gunner station, was barely larger than a coffin. He had to kneel on a bicycle seat, feet braced against the aircraft structure, hands wrestling 84-pound Browning M2 machine guns through a cramped field of fire. The guns pivoted on a simple yoke mount. His aiming system consisted of a ring and bead sight, a metal circle with a post at the front, like sights on a frontier rifle. To hit a diving fighter, Romano had to estimate the target's speed relative to his own aircraft, calculate deflection angle, where to aim ahead of the target, compensate for bullet drop over distance, execute all calculations while wearing bulky gloves in -40 temperatures, fire before the German pilot's cannons with 4 times his range, and hope his shots landed before his tail position was turned into shrapnel. Expert gunners from peacetime aerial gunnery schools attempted the same shots under controlled conditions. Their hit rates barely exceeded 12%. In combat, stressed, oxygen-deprived, and under fire, actual hit rates plummeted to 6 to 8%. The Luftwaffe recognized this vulnerability immediately. German fighter tactics evolved throughout 1943. Attack from 6 o'clock level or low, accept 15 to 20 seconds of inaccurate tail gunfire, close to 200 yards, and unleash devastating 20mm cannon strikes. Luftwaffe after-action reports described B-17 tail positions as marginally dangerous, accuracy insufficient to deter attacks. August 17, 1943, First Schweinfurt raid. 60 bombers lost. October 8, 1943, Bremen raid, 30 bombers lost. October 10, 1943, Münster raid, 30 bombers lost. The 8th Air Force hemorrhaged bombers faster than factories could replace them. General Henry Hap Arnold, commanding general of the Army Air Forces, received casualty reports in Washington and questioned whether daylight bombing remained viable. Engineers proposed solutions: more guns, bigger caliber, powered turrets. Boeing's Cheyenne Modification Center began designing an improved tail turret, but development timelines stretched into 1944. Powered turret prototypes existed, but installation required removing the entire tail section, a months-long factory modification impossible on bombers already in England. Meanwhile, men died. Romano flew his first combat mission on August 19, 1943, targeting Gilse Ryan Airfield in the Netherlands.
He fired 480 rounds at 3 attacking FW-190s. He believed he scored hits. Gun camera footage later revealed every tracer passed harmlessly behind the targets. The fighters destroyed 2 bombers in his formation. After his 3rd mission, Romano stayed on the hardstand after landing, staring at his guns. His hands shook, not from fear, but from the physical exhaustion of manhandling 84-pound weapons through sustained fire while kneeling at altitude. That night he sketched his first design concept. The problem wasn't the gun. It wasn't even the mount. It was that tail gunners fired blind, chasing targets they couldn't properly track, aiming at points in space they couldn't accurately predict. What Romano needed was something the Army Air Forces hadn't provided, a way to see where his bullets would actually go before pulling the trigger. He needed a reflector sight. But the tail position's cramped quarters made standard reflector installation impossible, unless someone broke the rules.
November 12, 1942, Western Desert, North Africa. A sky the color of gunmetal hung over the Sahara. The wind moved like a blade, carrying dust and the smell of burned fuel across the wasteland. The war in North Africa had already devoured men, tanks, and nations, and it was about to teach one soldier a lesson he would carry for the rest of his life. The wreck of a British supply convoy lay silent in the sand. Scattered crates, twisted steel, black smoke curling into the cold desert air. The battle had ended only minutes earlier. Tracer fire still glowed in the dunes, but the Afrika Korps advanced, disciplined and relentless. A scouting platoon moved in to secure the convoy. Helmets low, rifles ready. Their boots crunched over broken glass and shell casings. Every man expected traps. Every shadow felt like a sniper. That's when one of them saw it. A small shape, low, olive drab, parked halfway behind a shattered truck. Not British, not German. Something strange. A vehicle. A captured American vehicle. One of the soldiers called out, confused, "Was ist das?" They approached cautiously, rifles raised. It sat untouched, engine still warm. The paint was perfectly smooth, the tires thick and deep-tracked for terrain, rugged, compact, efficient. A metal plate on the dashboard read, Willis MB, U.S. Army. They called it a Jeep. The desert fell silent. The German lieutenant stepped forward, boots sinking into sand. His face was calm but curious, the kind of curiosity that comes before a storm. He looked at the mechanics in his unit. "Get our best man." Minutes later, he approached, the man who would become the witness of this story. A hardened Afrika Korps mechanic, a quiet man who had repaired everything from Panzer transmissions to half-tracks crippled under artillery fire. He valued one thing above all, German engineering superiority. To him, nothing built by Americans could match German precision. He opened the hood of the Jeep, and in that moment, everything he thought he knew about war, about engineering, about Germany's future, began to crack. Because inside the Jeep, nothing made sense. No complicated layout, no overworked metal, no delicate instruments, no need for specialized tools, no complex firing systems. Everything was simple, brutally simple. The kind of simple that only comes from genius. The wires were color-coded, every component labeled, bolts were standardized, fuel system, basic but unbreakable, air filter, field-ready, spark plugs, accessible in seconds. Everything was designed for a farm boy to fix in a trench under enemy fire.
It wasn't just a vehicle. It was a revelation. And as he stared under that hood, surrounded by the emptiness of the Sarah, he realized this machine wasn't built for comfort or elegance or beauty. This machine was built to win wars, and Germany had nothing like it. He didn't say a word, but the wind carried a message across the dunes, a warning from a silent enemy. America wasn't just fighting with soldiers. America was fighting with factories. And for the Africa Corps, that changed everything.
The morning sun rose over the wrecked supply column, turning the desert into a sheet of molten gold. The sand was littered with broken crates, torn canvas, and bullet-riddled fuel drums leaking into the ground like bleeding metal. Crows were already circling overhead. They always came after battle. Feldwebel Karl Weber wiped a line of sweat from his brow. He stood over the captured American Jeep, hands on his hips. He was a battlefield mechanic, attached to 9th Leichte Afrika Division, and he had seen hundreds of vehicles in his life, but never one like this. It looked crude, ugly even. Flat panels, box frame, simple canvas roof. No German engineer would dare make something so plain. But it had survived this ambush. Their own German vehicles hadn't. Behind him, Oberleutnant Franz Richter, their reconnaissance officer, tapped the Jeep's hood impatiently. "Can we use it?" Karl didn't answer immediately. He just stared at the Jeep. Most vehicles he encountered in Africa were stubborn bastards, delicate, over-designed, temperamental in the desert heat. But this thing, this box on wheels, felt different. It still smelled like gasoline and tobacco. It still looked alive. "We'll see," he finally answered. He pulled the hood latch and lifted, and then he froze. For the first time since he had been drafted into the Wehrmacht, a machine made him feel insulted. It shouldn't have been possible. The engine compartment was immaculate. Everything was labeled. Wiring was color-coded. Bolts were standard size. Parts could be removed in minutes without special tools. This wasn't German engineering. This was something else. Behind him, the other mechanics gathered around. "Mein Gott," muttered Dieter, his assistant. "Even the oil filter is easy to reach." "Look," Karl said, pointing to the layout. "No engineering arrogance. Everything is simple, practical, purpose-built." "This isn't engineering," Hans scoffed. "This is farm equipment." Karl shook his head. "No, this is war equipment." He pulled the choke and turned the ignition. The engine started on the first try. No grinding, no sputtering, just a smooth, controlled rumble. The men stepped back. Karl revved the engine skeptically. The Go Devil engine responded instantly. Tough, simple, uncomplaining. "How is that possible?" whispered Dieter. Karl didn't answer. His pride was at war with his reality. The Jeep worked. Better than anything he'd seen in North Africa. He looked around at the damaged column. One of their own Kubelwagons sat nearby, its suspension destroyed, its radiator cracked, its engine choked with sand. The German vehicle represented precision engineering, but this American Jeep represented something far more dangerous. Industrial ruthlessness. This thing wasn't built for elegance. It was built to be multiplied. "This changes everything," he muttered. "What?" Karl didn't respond. Instead, he reached into the glove box and pulled out a maintenance manual. His blood went cold. The instructions were written so simply
that any idiot could service this machine. Hans leaned over his shoulder and laughed bitterly. "They wrote these for peasants." "No," Carl said slowly, eyes narrowing. "They wrote this to win a long war." He stood up straight, feeling something he didn't want to feel. Respect. Far off in the dunes, artillery thundered again. Their war wasn't over, not by a long shot, but something had changed. He could feel it. Back at camp, the captured Jeep became a sensation. Officers argued over who would get to use it. Mechanics from other units came to inspect it, each wearing the same stubborn frown, trying to hate it, failing to. The Afrika Korps prided itself on endurance, discipline, and elite fighting spirit. They drove their vehicles until the suspensions broke and engines died in the sand. But they had always believed German design was the best in the world. Now, staring at the Jeep, Carl knew that was a lie. During field testing, he tried to break it. He overloaded the cargo. It kept moving. He drove it over rocks. It didn't complain. He cut through sand dunes that swallowed the Kubelwagen alive. The Jeep didn't even slow down. After 2 days, Carl sat alone beside the Jeep late at night, turning a wrench slowly in his hands. He looked at the simple stamped steel body. No curves, no elegance, just brutal efficiency. He hated it. He admired it. He feared it. This machine wasn't just a vehicle. It was a warning. If America builds everything like this, we can't win this war. A cold desert wind blew across the camp. He closed his eyes. For the first time since the war began, Carl Weber felt the first seed of doubt.
Night fell over the desert like a black curtain, swallowing the wreckage of tanks and burnt supply trucks in silence. The wind had died down, but the smell of diesel, cordite, and scorched metal still hung heavy in the air. The front line had moved on, but the ghosts of battle lingered. Feldwebel Carl Weber crouched beside the captured Jeep inside a dim tent lit by oil lanterns. Maps and scattered tools covered the ground around him. He hadn't slept since they found it. His mechanics had gone back to their bunks, but he remained, obsessed, silent, and grim. He was tearing the machine apart, piece by piece, not to repair it, but to understand it. Normally, when he touched machinery, he felt pride, order, logic. But this Jeep, it felt wrong. It shouldn't work as well as it did. It shouldn't be this easy to strip down, rebuild, and run again. War machines were supposed to be complicated. Maintenance was supposed to take hours. Broken parts were supposed to slow armies down. But this thing, this American bastard machine, was designed to make war faster. Carl ran his hand along the transfer case and four-wheel drive lever. Even that was genius in its simplicity. German Kubelwagens had decent engineering, but no four-wheel drive. They relied on clever differential tricks. This Jeep just brute-forced physics with all four wheels. Crude, savage, effective. He turned, hearing footsteps approach. Oberleutnant Franz Richter entered the tent. "You're still working?" Richter asked. Carl didn't answer. He just kept his eyes on the Jeep's exposed engine. Richter sighed. "You look like you want to strangle it." Carl finally spoke. "It shouldn't exist." Richter frowned. "Meaning?" "It's not engineered like a German vehicle," Carl said. "There was no elegance here. Everything is cheap, rough, mass-produced." "And that bothers you?" Carl looked up, face lit by lantern glow. "It terrifies me." Richter crossed his arms. "The men love it. They're saying if Rommel had 1,000 of these, he'd already be in Cairo." Carl laughed darkly. "Try 10,000, and he might make it to Jerusalem on the way.
Richter leaned closer. "You're saying this Jeep is better than our Kubel wagon?" Carl didn't answer. He didn't have to. His silence was enough. Richter exhaled slowly. "Then write me a report." "Oh, there will be a report. But nobody will like it. Make it anyway." Richter turned to leave, but paused in the doorway. "And Carl?" "What?" Richter's face hardened. "Don't let the men see you afraid." Captured truth. The next morning, Carl gathered his mechanics around a table made from ammunition crates. He unrolled a sheet of canvas and placed two objects on it: a Kubel wagon drive shaft and a Jeep drive shaft.
"Study them," he said. Hans lifted the German part. Precision machined, perfectly balanced, light. Beautiful engineering. Then he picked up the American drive shaft. It was thicker, rougher, ugly, like it had been hammered together by someone who didn't give a damn how it looked. Dieter laughed. "This looks like blacksmith work." Carl pointed. "Which one do you think survives a landmine blast?" The laughter stopped. He slammed the Jeep part on the table. "This isn't beauty. This is war. This thing isn't made for parades. It's made to be built fast, driven hard, and survive hell." He pulled open a crate and dumped more parts on the table. Jeep axles, air filters, fuel pumps. "All standardized," Carl said. "Interchangeable across every Jeep they make. Do you understand what that means?" Hans frowned. "Factories can replace parts fast?" Carl shook his head. "No, it means they can build an army faster than we can destroy it." Silence. Nobody laughed now. The report Berlin won't want. By evening, Carl sat hunched over a crate with a fountain pen, writing by lantern light. Technical summary, U.S. Willys MB, field assessment. Conclusion, the American Jeep is not a vehicle, it is a strategy. He wrote about cold start performance, excellent. Engine access for field maintenance, exceptional. Parts interchangeability, revolutionary. Shock absorption over rough terrain, superior. Fuel compatibility, runs on almost anything. Serviceability by anyone with basic tools, dangerous advantage. He hesitated before writing the final line. His pride didn't want him to write it, but his duty forced him to. Recommendation: immediate study and adoption of similar principles, or within 2 years, we will be overwhelmed by American production capacity. He signed it, Feldwebel Carl Weber, Afrika Korps, Vehicle Maintenance Command. He hated what he wrote, because every word was true. Desert Trial. 2 nights later, Rommel's Corps moved under the cover of darkness, withdrawing deeper into Tunisia under constant British pressure. The Jeep came with them. During a night convoy, they reached a dune slope that stopped the German column cold. Trucks bogged down, half-tracks struggled. The Kubelwagens died in the sand one by one. Richter looked back at Carl. "Test it." Carl climbed into the driver's seat. The engine came alive instantly. He threw it into 4-wheel drive and drove straight up the dune. Effortlessly. The entire column watched. Nobody spoke. Nobody needed to. The truth was now obvious. Germany's engineering pride had just been outmatched by American practicality. And Carl knew this was only the beginning.
Night convoys in the desert were a special kind of hell. Engines overheated, transmissions locked, and sand clogged every machine built by men who had never seen real war. The Afrika Korps had learned a long time ago, the desert doesn't kill you with bullets first. It kills your machinery, it kills your hope, then it kills you. But one machine refused to die. The Jeep. A machine that keeps moving. Carl sat behind the wheel, knuckles white as he gripped it. The desert wind slapped his face, gritty sand stinging his skin. The Jeep growled beneath him, steady, obedient, unstoppable. He crested the dune and circled back down when something caught his eye, half buried in shadow near a dry, waddy trench. A Ford GPA amphibious Jeep, another American design, half sunk, abandoned. More of them were here, more than one. The Americans had left equipment behind like trash, not because they were careless, because they had so much of it. They didn't need to go back for it. Carl stared at the machines for a long time. Germany could barely replace trucks lost in battle. America left them behind like empty ration tins. Night fire. Tracer rounds cut suddenly through the darkness, thin red streaks whipping past like angry meteors. Artillery thundered a moment later, mortars exploding across the column. Ambush! Take cover! Chaos erupted. Men scrambled, falling into the sand face first. A shell annihilated a truck nearby, sending a flaming tire spinning into the sky like a drunk comet. Screams tore through the smoke. Richter slid down behind Caro. British artillery, move, move! We can't. The Hoff tracks are stuck. Leave them. Caro looked at him in disbelief. Abandon armored vehicles? Impossible. Richter pointed forward. Get the Jeep through and flank them. Find their forward observers. Carl nodded once. Mission clear. He hit the accelerator. The Jeep surged forward like a beast hungry for the hunt. They tore across the sand while artillery shells bloomed behind them. Marek manned the MG-34 on the back seat, teeth clenched against the recoil. Bullets zipped past, kicking up dirt. Carl heard metal rip and prayed it wasn't the engine block. But the Jeep just kept going. How was this thing still running? Marek yelled over the gunfire. Because the Americans built it to survive idiots, Carl shouted back. They dipped into a ravine, bouncing so hard the suspension growled but held. The Jeep didn't complain. It wanted more, like a wolf scenting blood. They spotted the British artillery team, 5 men operating 2 25-pounder guns. No time for finesse. Carl floored the pedal and the Jeep lunged across the sand ridge like a charging hyena. Marek fired first. Carl received his own version of the report. He read it in silence, then folded it carefully. He finally understood why his army could win battles, but lose the war. His chief of staff asked, "What should we do?" Rommel replied, "Continue fighting." "But how do we win?" the officer asked. Rommel looked out across the endless sand. "We don't." That night, a lone crate arrived in Carl's workshop, stamped with black requisition symbols. He opened it expecting Kubelwagen parts. Inside, American Jeep parts. Oil filters, bolts, spark plugs, suspension components. He held a metal crate label in disbelief. It was marked Priority, Field Operational, Do Not Delay. Sent from German High Command. It was happening. Germany had not only accepted the Jeep, Germany was now supplying Jeep parts to its own army. A foreign machine, now part of the Reich's war effort. This was beyond defeat. This was surrender. Carl wrote in his notebook, "We used to mock this vehicle. Now it keeps us alive. Truth always wins in the end, but sometimes it arrives too late to save you."
Pride doesn't die in a single moment. It erodes slowly under pressure, defeat, and necessity. And in 1943, in the deserts of North Africa, German military pride finally collapsed. The proof? Officers, men who once laughed at the Jeep, were now begging for one. The order that changed everything. A sandstorm raged when a convoy from the 10th Panzer Division rolled into Carl's desert workshop, half the vehicles broken, radiators boiling dry, wheels locked with sand-clogged brakes.
Out stepped Hauptmann Franz Bayer, a hard-faced officer who had once told Karl to keep American trash off the battlefield. Now he looked different, older, exhausted, defeated. He said, "Unteroffizier Weber," not shouting, but requesting, which was rare for an officer. "I need vehicles that can move in deep sand. We're transferring artillery positions overnight." Karl pointed at the broken Kubelwagens. "They won't make it," he said. Bayer didn't argue. He just asked, "Do you have any jeeps?" There it was. No more denial, no arrogance, just desperation. Karl nodded. 3 operational, 2 more if we swap axles tonight. Bayer took a long breath. "We'll take all 5. Karl frowned. Regulations forbid frontline jeep deployment without division authorization. Bayer looked him dead in the eyes. Regulations are for men who aren't being bombed to death. The jeep convoy. The next morning, Karl drove one of the jeeps himself across the open dunes with Bayer's forward artillery section. The 5 jeeps weaved through sandhills like wolves on the hunt, fluid, fast, unstoppable. No wheels bogged down, no engines overheated, no men had to get out and push. Behind them, 2 Kubelwagens tried to follow and immediately sank. Within minutes, they were nothing but distant specks, abandoned in the desert like metal tombstones. Death from above.